Hello everybody, Ellie here for WhoCulture, and we have made it to the end of season 2 of Doctor Who. It's been a real journey. We've had some highs, some lows, some ups and downs, you might say. And just as we did for season 1, what we're going to do here today is take a look at season 2 as a whole and look at what worked and what didn't for us. So without further ado, let's get into the ups and downs for season 2.
We travel in and out of the slipstreams of time. Beautiful things can be forgotten.
So I want to start with an up for this season. Now, a big criticism that we had for season 1 is that none of the episodes ever felt particularly scary or tense or dark. There were the odd moments, but on the whole, we didn't really have a lot of that tension. Now, this season, in that regard, I feel has definitely upped its game. The Well was the first episode of this new Disney era of Doctor Who to make me jump. It felt like the first episode where I felt like it was the Doctor Who I grew up watching. It had that tension and that dark side to it. And there were high stakes. I mean, people were being killed in violent, visceral ways. And that's something that had been lacking in the previous season. Then you look at Lucky Day, for example, and you had that brilliant scene between Ruby and Conrad in the coffee shop. The shriek was emerging, and it was really, really tense. And then you've got characters like Mr. Ring-a-Ding. Even Mr. Ring-a-Ding had a creepiness to him that I feel is necessary in Doctor Who. I've said this many, many times, but for me, it works the best. Doctor Who works the best when it has tension, when it is scaring you. The whole thing that Doctor Who has been famous for the last 60 plus years is having kids hiding behind the sofa. And I haven't really felt we've had many moments of that in this new era of the show. But I think this season has definitely given us more moments of it where I felt like, okay, this is more like it. Then you come to an episode like the Interstellar Song Contest, which perhaps on the surface is the more camp episode because of the whole Eurovision links, and perhaps seems like it's going to be the more light-hearted episode. And then literally the whole audience are killed quite horrendously in the first 10 minutes of the episode. It gives us the darkest moment of this Doctor's entire run. So there are darker elements to pretty much every episode of this season, and for me, that was a really big highlight. We certainly didn't have any of the silliness that we saw in Space Babies, for example. It felt like the show was taking itself a bit more seriously, which, brilliant. Yes, that's what we like to see. The show may have silly things all about it, but the thing that works best is that the show itself takes it seriously. And while we're on the topic of this darker tone of the season, it brings me to another up for season 2, which is a wider range of emotions and attitudes from the Doctor. We see him angry, as well as other emotions. Now, as you guys know, a big criticism for season 1 that I had was the overuse of the kind of tearful, freezed up response from the Doctor in any given big situation. To me, that didn't really feel like what the Doctor should be doing. I want the Doctor to be the character that instills confidence in the audience, in the other characters around him, that he is going to save them. And season 1 basically showed him tearing up and freezing up in those situations. Now, I will say that towards the beginning of this season, I was concerned that we were just going to see more of the same. And so I was pleasantly surprised when later on we started to see some real changes in this Doctor and see a wider range of reactions and emotions from him. So I think the first example of this really was the ending of Lucky Day when 15 loses it at Conrad. And it was so nice to see him release his inner Time Lord victorious and get angry. He's allowed to get angry when things are irritating, when people have done something to anger him. And so it was really lovely to see this emerge from this Doctor who, up until this point, we hadn't really seen any of that from. And then we come to the story in the engine, which I think gave us the most well-rounded portrayal of the Doctor, or the 15th Doctor, of the entire Disney era. Not only did we see a return of that anger, but we saw all sorts of other things from this Doctor. We saw arrogance, we saw confidence, we saw sadness, betrayal, sarcasm. We really got the full gamut of the core characteristics of any Doctor. And then we get to the Interstellar Song Contest and we're treated to full-on rage from the Doctor. Now for me, this was the moment where I really went, yes, Finally, this is the character who needs those human companions because he is an alien and he doesn't quite understand the world, and sometimes he does go too far, and that's why he has those human companions there that ground him, bring him back down. And it took Belinda coming in and the horrified look on her face at his actions to bring him out of it. And it really gave me this air of, this is what the dynamic of Doctor Who should be. The Doctor doesn't fully understand humanity, and it takes those human companions to bring that out of him. And, you know, think about Donna in The Runaway Bride, stopping him from going too far. Rose in Dalek, or even Adelaide Brooke in The Waters of Mars, calling the Doctor out on going too far and pushing things to extreme limits. That's what I like to see. So I was really, really glad to see some rage come out of this Doctor because it was so different from anything we'd seen from this particular incarnation so far. But also, it gave us that better element of the Doctor companion dynamic as well. And speaking about that Doctor companion dynamic, this brings me to a point that gets both an up but also a down. So we'll start with the positive side of this, which is I feel as though the dynamic between the Doctor and Belinda was far better than what we saw in season 1 between the Doctor and Ruby. We spoke a lot last season about how the relationship between the Doctor and Ruby didn't feel quite right because it was so perfect. There was no conflict. We had a lot of them telling us they were friends, but not a lot of seeing that friendship develop. Now for this season, I definitely think that was improved upon. We had more of those scenes in the TARDIS that showed the Doctor and Belinda learning more about each other. Again, maybe they were a little bit exposition heavy, but we had more of it than we saw in season 1. And you started to kind of see that friendship develop a little bit more. Not only that, but you had that conflict because Belinda did not want to be there. And the entirety of episode 1 was her basically rejecting the Doctor's adventurous behaviours and him wanting to kind of get this new companion, and she shut that down. She wanted to go home. So we had this reluctant companion. So instantly this dynamic has conflict within it. But then that does bring me to the downside of this point, which is that although it was great to have that reluctant companion, I would have liked to have seen that carry on for far longer than it did, because by the end of episode 2, she'd basically got on board with the adventures. And that whole resistance that we'd seen in episode 1 and the, what's the word I'm looking for? The agency of Belinda that we saw in episode 1 of kind of being very strong-willed and not adhering to all of the wonder that the Doctor is trying to put upon her and calling him out was basically gone. And then she just became this companion who was enjoying the adventures and allowing him to go off and do what he wanted. And although it was, let's go home, it kind of felt a little bit less believable because she was so enjoying what she was doing. And by the time you get to the Interstellar Song Contest, she was the one who chose to stay. She wanted to stay there. So it was a little bit disappointing that we lost that conflict so quickly. And I guess while we're talking about Belinda, it does bring me onto my next down for this season, which is the arcs. The overall arcs of this season just didn't live up to what we'd hoped. So we'll start with Belinda in terms of this. We didn't really learn much about Belinda across all these episodes. She didn't really have much of an arc. But when we met her in the Robot Revolution, we did learn some things about her. We learned that she was a nurse. We learned that she kind of rejected this idea of stereotypical marriage. She didn't want to be Mrs. Alan Budd. She didn't like the whole Miss part of her name. She was very strong-willed, this independent, career-driven woman. Now, we did learn a little bit about her mum and dad, and it seems like potentially that was going to be leading somewhere. We had this kind of hint towards her connection with Mundy Flynn, and then this whole mystery about why the Doctor had been told to seek her out in the first place. So there were these things dangling that suggested that there was going to be some importance to when we got to the season finale. What actually happened is we got to the season finale, and she went from having very little story arc to a completely different one thrown at her in the last 10 minutes of the episode. and I don't like it. Now, while I do understand that the whole point of this scene was that the Doctor had changed the timeline and Belinda's whole life had changed, it just felt like we'd been cheated. Over the last 7 weeks, well 6 because I guess Wishworld is part of this, but we'd been cheated because everything we had been told, however minuscule that information had been, but all those things that had been dangled then just seemed completely pointless and irrelevant, and it felt like we were just being introduced to an entirely different character. And any agency that she did have and was building was completely stripped away by placing this entirely different storyline on her in the last 10 minutes, and it just felt like it completely came out of left field, and just, why did you do that? And I guess when you compare that to Ruby, while the resolution to Ruby's mystery was disappointing at the end of season 1, the speculation and the intrigue surrounding her whole arc was very exciting, and it got us talking, and although the payoff didn't really sit well with us, we were gripped by it. Whereas Belinda didn't really have much going for her in terms of an arc, and then, as I say, she just got thrown one in the last 10 minutes. And yeah. Let's talk about another arc that seems to vanish halfway through. What happened to the Pantheon? I mean, they seem to just fizzle out by the end. Okay, yes, we had Desiderium who was creating the Wish World. But other than that, now I really thought that this season was heading towards a finale with another battle with the gods, or with a big god in some way. Especially because we had Lux appearing early on, then we had that bait and switch of the story in the engine where we thought it was going to be another god story, but no, actually this was an ordinary man telling the stories of the gods. But again, that theme of the gods was still playing, so I really thought that's what we were building towards. By the end of this season, I don't even know if the gods still exist. When the Doctor changed the timeline, are we now in a reality where the gods don't exist anymore? What happened to the gods? I feel like they were building and building, and I thought we were going to really get somewhere. Mrs. Flood, we had all these theories that she was the god of stories and creating this reality. It was all building somewhere. It had all been laid out. And then what happened? And then Mrs. Flood. I just mentioned Mrs. Flood there. Don't even get me started on Mrs. Flood. I feel like the mystery of Mrs. Flood really lost its momentum about halfway through, when it became very repetitive and very predictable. But then we finally do get the big reveal that, yay, she's the Rani, only for her to be replaced and sidelined by a new incarnation of the character. It really, honestly baffles me why they made the choice to tease us and build up Mrs. Flood and the mystery surrounding her for 2 seasons, and then chose not to have Anita Dobson to be the big bad of the season finale. What was the point in building us up with this particular character and actor just to have them sidelined at the last minute? And not to mention all the unanswered questions that still linger regarding Mrs. Flood. Like, why could she break the fourth wall? What was that whole speech to Cherry Sunday all about at the beginning of Empire of Death? Because that did not feel like the Rani speaking there. That felt like this was originally intended to be a different character. And also, why was she pretending to be Mrs. Flood even when the Doctor wasn't around or aware of her? Like, what was the point of her being in Belinda's story, in the story in the engine? The story about Belinda's life, and she walked past her and said, "Hi Belinda, just getting my pills." I'll tell you what the point of that was. They'd said to us she was going to be in every episode, and so they had to put her in there. But when you actually think about it, it made no sense. If she was the Rani building some grand plan, why was she keeping up the pretenses and purposely seeking out Belinda when she didn't need to be? It doesn't make sense to me. All of these arcs just feel incomplete or disappointing. So anyway, Mrs. Flood does bi-generate into Archie Panjabi's version of the Rani, who was brilliant, by the way. Let me just add that. There's nothing against Archie Panjabi or her performance. I just feel like it wasn't necessary and kind of undermined the whole point of Anita Dobson being in these episodes. But at least now we have the Rani, or we have 2 Ranis, so at least now we're going to go into a 2-part season finale that's going to be a really great Rani story, right? That was the hope, folks. And this brings me to do something that I have not yet done on this channel, but I can't ignore it any longer, and it has to be done. So, my friends, I'm going to give my first ever deadlock down. There was so much wasted potential in this season. This could have been a really great season finale focusing on the Rani. But not content with just one legacy villain returning, Russell T Davies had to bring back Omega as well. And in doing this, what we got was a 2-part season finale that felt massively overstuffed, but also massively undercooked. The return of Omega could have been something really, really wonderful. This could have been something in a similar vein to the return of the Master in Series 3. This could have been brilliant. What we actually ended up getting was a really, really bad CGI design, a quick dispatching of the Rani in the process of Omega's return, and less than 5 minutes of screen time before he's destroyed. He literally didn't even manage to climb all the way out of his chamber before he was destroyed and disappeared. What a waste! Now, if this had been just a generic monster from the Underverse that was trying to escape due to the Rani's plan, change the Rani's plan somehow, and maybe not have it be Omega, but something to do with the Underverse, sure. Now, I wouldn't have been so disappointed if this had just been a generic monster. I would have been like, ha, well, the Doctor quickly saw to you, didn't he? But to use a legacy character like that and waste that potential is what's so disappointing. Because I feel like you should have saved Omega for a story that was deserving of this great return. But instead, you built up our hopes, you teased this brilliant return of Omega, and completely ruined it. Not to mention the Rani, who was very quickly dispatched in this episode as well. I mean, her story did feel rather surface level. A lot of her scenes were just very exposition heavy. But then she was just done away with so unceremoniously that it just, again, felt like a wasted use of this legacy character. And as I say, a lot of this comes down to trying to do too much at once. Too much going on at once. You've got Omega, you've got the Rani, we had the Pantheon in there somewhere. Then you have the whole thing with Poppy thrown in as well. There was just so much going on. And what started out as, who is Mrs. Flood at the beginning of this season? Oh, we're building towards this great story of Mrs. Flood, became this overstuffed finale where nothing really felt like it ended in a satisfying way. And while we're on the topic of that wasted potential, we then come to Susan. It was so lovely to see the return of Carol Ann Ford. Finally, we see Carol Ann Ford in the modern era of Doctor Who. Now, don't get me wrong, I loved that part. It was brilliant to see her. But what was the point? This is just another example of that wasted potential because everything was pointing towards the much anticipated reunion between Susan and her grandfather, only for her to literally not appear at all in the season finale. We only got those very brief flashes in the Interstellar Song Contest and very briefly in Wish World on the television screen. Why was she saying "find me" if it wasn't leading towards that reunion? If that wasn't where the story was heading, why was she saying "find me"? Why was she there if we weren't going to see her? Another legacy character being dangled there and teased and entirely wasted. Now, it may well be the case that this was originally the intention and Susan was originally intended to be in the finale, but then the reality war was reworked to be a regeneration story for Ncuti Gatwa. But then I asked the question of, why did you keep the clips in the previous episodes if you had to change the ending of the last one? Because if you had had the ending, those clips made sense. Those clips were building to something. Because that ending was taken away, those clips then just felt like wasting a character who you could have saved for a future story. I even feel like the whole Poppy storyline could have been reworked to fit around Susan in some way. I can't see why these rewrites basically decided to change Belinda's entire arc rather than still keeping Susan in there and reworking it to link with Poppy somehow. And it still could have been a regeneration story, but they could have made that connection between Poppy being the Doctor's daughter, Susan is the Doctor's granddaughter. I just feel like there was a better way for that to be reworked so that we weren't teased with a Susan return that we then never got. Wasted potential. While the finale may have irked a lot of fans, I think it's important that we do recognise that we had some really strong, really great episodes in the middle of this season. It brings me to another up for season 2, which is the wide variety of fresh, new writers that we had. I think it does say a lot that the strongest episodes of this season were all written by a writer other than Russell T Davies. Inua Ellams stands out for his creativity and for his deep understanding of what makes a great Doctor Who episode, as well as providing the most well-rounded representation or presentation of the Doctor. Those characteristics that are the Doctor. Brilliant. Well done, Inua Ellams. Pete McTighe gave us that really unexpected rug pull in the middle of Lucky Day that we totally did not see coming, and I'm not saying that as a joke, I did not see that rug pull coming. He also provided some much needed development for Ruby's characterization. I think it was really interesting to have this story exploring the effects, the after effects of adventures and experiences with the Doctor on normal life, and seeing a companion readjusting back into normal life and the struggles that unfold because of the experiences they've had. And I think it did a lot for Ruby's character. As I say, Ruby was a character I never really warmed to, but I think her appearance in Lucky Day and her appearance in The Reality War really changed my mind on her as a character. And a lot of that came down to Pete McTighe's writing for the character in Lucky Day. The Well. Now, that was co-written by Sharma Angel Woolfall and Russell T Davies, but it is interesting that I think probably the most criticised element of that episode, it being a sequel to Midnight, was probably where Russell T Davies' input lies. The rest of the story, Alice, Shire, the overall darker, more tense vibes and tone of the episode, were likely the result of Sharma's work. And let's not forget that Juno Dawson gave us the most unexpected but highly desired moment of the 15th Doctor, showing us this rage coming from him, giving us even more to explore with this incarnation. All of these writers contributed something really amazing to this season, and I think it was great that we had more variety in this season than we did last season. The same thing happened last season. The two strongest episodes were not written by Russell T Davies. Now, this is not me hating on Russell T Davies, but it is telling that the strongest episodes are coming from fresh, new writers, given the opportunity to show what they can do and elevate Doctor Who with their creativity. I mean, who knows? One of these writers could be the future showrunner of Doctor Who. Before I get to my overall thoughts on the season, what I am going to do is give you my overall ranking of each episode, of all the episodes. Some of you may not have seen our spoiler discussion videos of this season. Each week we added to the list so that we have a full ranking of the episodes. So starting at the bottom at number 8, I had The Robot Revolution. This is an episode that was by far an upgrade from Space Babies as a season opener. Much more serious tone, with some comedy in there as well. I would say though, in regards to this episode, I haven't really given it much thought since I watched it. Whereas the others I have thought about, I've spoken about more, I've had good conversations about following them. This one was a perfectly fine, okay episode, but was just kind of, yeah. Then coming in at number 7, we have Wish World. This was very clearly a part 1, which is not a criticism in itself, but I feel like there was a lot going on, but also nothing happening at the same time. Very clearly a build-up for then what we were going to have in the Reality War. And for that, it kind of feels like we watched 45 minutes of build-up, but not much more. Coming in at number 6, we then have the Reality War. For as much as there were elements of this episode that I did not like and really did frustrate me, I also really enjoyed a lot of elements of this episode too. I love that we had the return of Anita. It was brilliant to see her there. I think it did lots for the development of Ruby as a character. As I say, I now kind of have changed my thoughts on her as a character. So there were some great elements in there as well. Obviously we had the regeneration, which looked wonderful, but also there were some big issues as well. Coming in at number 5, we have the Interstellar Song Contest. This was an enjoyable episode. I think that there were some really strong themes in there. I really did enjoy that part. I just think compared to the rest of the episodes that are higher on this list, it was a bit more of a generic episode for me, but by no means a bad episode at all. Number 4, we have Lux. When I first watched Lux, I was like, oh, well, it's not going to get much better than this. And episode after that just kind of set the bar higher and higher. I love the creativity that we had with Lux. To push the boat out and try something new that we hadn't seen in the show before, the animation character come to life, that was brilliant. I really loved that. And something that could have been really cheesy with the scene with the fans, actually I think worked very well. So it was a very strong episode. Then we come to my top 3. So coming in at number 3, we have Lucky Day. I genuinely thought when I first watched this episode, or when I started watching this episode, that I wasn't going to enjoy it because it was a Ruby-focused episode. Well, I ate my words because I actually really enjoyed it. I loved the rug pull in the middle. I didn't see it coming, which is what I like. I don't want Doctor Who to be predictable. I want it to surprise me. I love that we had more of UNIT. I love to see that unfold. It's got me very excited for the war between the land and the sea, which focuses on UNIT as well. Overall, really good episode. Number 2, I have put the story and the engine. This is the first episode where I felt like the character of the Doctor was really well-rounded, and I guess a lot of that did come down to the script. Inua Ellams is a fan of Doctor Who, and it shows in his understanding of how to structure an episode. I found it very interesting. I liked that we got to explore a different culture. A really great episode. Murray Gold also, yes, sir, I love you. And coming in at number 1 for me is The Well. Now, I know there has been criticism of the midnight sequel element to it, but for me, this was the episode where I really felt like I was watching the same show I grew up watching. It had the tension, it made me jump, it was very character focused, it was set in a bunker. There wasn't some really fancy CGI effects going on. It focused on the characters, the relationships, the story, and that is why for me it was the strongest episode of the season. So overall, I do feel like season 2 was a step up from season 1. I came out of the majority of these episodes feeling excited, feeling positive, feeling like, okay, Doctor Who is back. We're on the right track now. This was definitely a step up from how I felt coming out of season 1, where I came out of most episodes feeling a little bit deflated, like, nah, I was really hoping that was going to be better. This season, majority of the time, very excited and positive coming out of each episode. I think the biggest letdown of this season does lie in the finale. It didn't quite pay off. Lots of the mystery and the arcs and the questions that had been laid out didn't really feel like they came to a satisfying conclusion. A lot of wasted potential and too many pots on the stove, as I've said in previous videos. I think it is a shame that this season is likely going to be remembered for this messy finale, and overlook the fact that we had some really strong, brilliant episodes in the middle. So if I could say anything, I would say, let's remember this season for the positive things that it did give and the creativity of those episodes in the middle that we were all raving about at the time, and try not to let the messy finale be the only thing we remember it for. In terms of the 15th Doctor, I think this season really did well in giving us more depth to the character, and I was really starting to see more layers and really get gripped by this character, and so it's such a shame that we now have to say goodbye to Ncuti Gatwa just as he was starting to really get into the role. It is so disappointing, and I think it was a really strong season for him as the Doctor, starting to explore those different layers, that wider variety of emotions and reactions, and it is sad to see Ncuti Gatwa go. And there you have it, folks. That is my overall review of season 2 of Doctor Who. But don't think we're going anywhere. Oh, no. First of all, if you haven't watched all the coverage of this season, what are you doing? There's a whole playlist on the channel, so go check that out. But we've got the war between the land and the sea coming, and you can be sure that we are going to cover that just as we've covered this season of Doctor Who. I'm so excited for the war between the land and the sea. That trailer has got me gripped. In the meantime, though, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of River Song herself, goodbye, sweeties.